I think, first of all, when taking a look at the existentialist movement, the important thing is really to distinguish it slightly from other philosophical movements. Many people now regard it as perhaps irrelevant. Many things have happened since then. Structuralism, post-structuralism, postmodernism, an invasion of isms has left it somehow back in the 40s with cafes on the left bank and coffee and Juliet Greco and that sort of thing. I think the importance of existentialism is wider than that, and its relevance contemporary. I think the movements influenced by it, particularly those that are into, let's say, direct political action and considering the role that terrorism might play, have found in it a rich body of thought. So if we're starting to look at the historical figures who've influenced that thought, and if we focus on any of the existentialist figures, we can see that we go quite far and wide. So for instance, a figure like Sartre is influenced by Nietzsche and Nietzsche's revaluation of morality, Nietzsche's replacement of God with a life that you make yourself. At the same time, the decadents are thinking that through. So that's also in the culture. It's not only the French decadents, it's in Oscar Wilde, make your life into a work of art. We can see that later in Sartre and the Project. So that's the first thing. Their influences are many and wide. Sartre particularly is coming from a French Cartesian tradition. We can see that in the work, and he acknowledges that in being and nothingness, that's one of the central flaws. However, the sorts of concerns he has in there mitigate against that. It's possible to connect him back very easily to the French moralists, people like La Rochefoucauld, and phrases such as your virtues are your vices in disguise. These are cold dissections of the culture of the day, and that's the 17th century. Pascal also is really thinking what man is in the infinite universe. Those two figures, I think, point in two directions with existentialism. On the one hand, the wonderful cynicism of La Rochefoucauld is reflected clearly in Sartre. It's in their literature, it's in Stendhal. The French moralist tradition, often not acknowledged by English philosophical commentators. That's really crucial, and we see that reflected later in the plays. And the Pascal clearly is also going through to, Pascal's a Christian. He's the smartest thinker of the day, also a scientist, mathematician. And we can see the questions he poses running right through to Kierkegaard. So Christianity is there, and the challenge of Christianity, and the possibility in what Charles Taylor and others call the waning of faith, the secular age, the contradictions that those removing those Christian shackles presents humanity with. That's really at the heart of Sartre and the other existentialists. The next person's important to consider is really Hegel. Hegel is, of course, the great phenomenology. His masterwork, written indeed, the French Connection, it's finished as Napoleon is invading Jena, and Hegel literally looks out of the window and says the world historical consciousness has arrived on horseback. He recognises that Napoleon is going to change Europe, and that these new ideas are going to change Europe. The consequences of that and the subsequent change in French life are profound. But what Hegel had and Sartre doesn't have is a social notion of self. Many people have criticised Sartre for this and the other existentialists. For Hegel, really the self is at one with the world, for the world forms it, and the self understands itself as formed by the world. That's Hegel completing the phenomenology, knowing that he understands the progression of world historical consciousness to this moment, which is his reflection as a German bourgeois on the development of our philosophy and religion, which are for Hegel the big three. It's mankind developing. For Sartre, that's not the case. Sartre is much more in that Cartesian and French moralist tradition. However, almost a contemporary of Sartre and equally influential, also on Sartre, is Koyeva, who has a communist background and affiliations and works as a party man throughout his life. In the papers on Hegel, he gives a very much humanist Marxist perspective, and that is influencing the early Sartre. And this is at the same kind of period that Sartre is getting Nausea together. Also in those seminars, Koyeva's Hegel seminars, is Jacques Lacan. Lacan, who later will always acknowledge Koyeva as his key figure. So those two different people, similar age, 1 year between them, Lacan in psychoanalysis and Sartre in existentialism, are forged really by an Hegelian moment. Also, the work of Heidegger. Heidegger's break with Husserl is important. Husserl is hugely impressed by what Heidegger does, but what Heidegger does is take phenomenology away from its Kantian root. The essence of the project that Husserl is trying to complete is in that sphere. He's trying to give to the mind and phenomenology an understanding of how it operates in the world. Heidegger's introduction of authenticity, of being toward death, totally changes that. And the notion of time that we get in Heidegger and his critique of Aristotle is profoundly important. It's that influences the young Sartre, so that he, in a cafe with others, says, the brilliance of Heidegger is that I can take this glass of beer on the table and I can produce philosophy out of this. Just my reflections on this and me here now in time talking to you. So those many things are swirling around, but it's not just the philosophers, I think, who are influencing Sartre and the others. The monster of an example for them is very much Picasso. Picasso is born in 1881, so he's 25 years older than Sartre. He's well established. He's produced the defining works of 20th century modernism, and he's produced them out of himself. So if there is an existential God for them all, this is the Picasso who can do anything and everything, even write plays, who can dip in and out of all of the other movements, surrealism, make a contribution and come out. So I think it's important in discussing the existentialists to place them in that bubbling cauldron that was philosophy, but also art, that was inheriting a tradition of thought that in France goes back to Montaigne, of course. And many philosophers have pointed to the importance of that essayistic style. Often missed with the French is the fact that I think, particularly by the Anglo-Americans in their philosophy departments, they're a nation of essayists, really. They're provocative positions in their papers, whereas our tradition is very different. We come from a rational school that's gone down through Locke in philosophy, through Hobbes in politics. Those are very different. The channel's about 2,000 wide. Whereas between America, that's 25 wide. We're very close to them. We don't inherit those traditions, or if we do, we inherit them down a different line. The English poets, really, and the English Romantic poets are bringing over those continental thoughts, and that's what I think makes them great. It's the Romanticism that's there straight after Hegel with the Romantic movement. So Sartre and the existentialists are inheriting a large tradition.